My name is Samantha Lawson, and I was 32 the night my life unraveled over a simple dinner. It started like any other evening: Thai takeout, a modest apartment that I had always felt was just okay, and the low hum of the city outside the window. Ethan, my husband of 5 years, sat across from me, quietly eating his pad thai. Normally, his calm presence soothed me, or at least I pretended it did, but that night I was restless. I had had a long day at work. Meetings ran late, a client screamed over email, and my assistant had forgotten to order supplies. I wanted to vent, to feel heard, and I expected Ethan to nod along, maybe make a sympathetic comment. Instead, he ate quietly, his gaze calm, almost unnervingly serene. "You know," I said, stirring my noodles absent-mindedly, "maybe I should just find a new partner. Someone who can actually give me the life I deserve instead of this mediocrity." I laughed as I said it, a brittle, half-hearted sound. Clearly it was a joke, just venting. He looked up slowly, wiping his mouth with the napkin. His eyes were unreadable. Then he said the words I would never forget. "Great idea. Start packing tonight." I froze, my chopsticks clattering against the plate. "What?" I whispered, unsure if I had heard correctly. He reached beside his chair and pulled out a manila envelope, sliding it across the table toward me. My hands trembled as I picked it up. Inside were the divorce papers, real ones, signed, dated, filed that morning at the courthouse. The room tilted slightly as I stared at the documents. I felt a wave of disbelief, anger, humiliation, and fear all at once. This can't be serious," I said. "I'm serious," Ethan replied calmly. "You've made that exact joke at least 15 times this year. I stopped counting after the 7th. I filed for divorce this morning. You have until the end of the month to move out." I tried to laugh, tried to shake it off. "I was joking. I didn't mean it like that." He leaned back in his chair, unbothered by my panic. "Doesn't matter how you meant it. What matters is how you behaved. I deserve someone who respects me, and you deserve to find whatever you're looking for. But it's not me." The words hit me harder than any slap could have. I looked around our apartment, the walls lined with framed memories and photographs of vacations we had taken together. All of it suddenly felt suffocatingly alien, as if I had been living in someone else's life for years. "Where are you going?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Hotel. I'll be back tomorrow to discuss logistics. My lawyer's information is in the envelope. Review the papers. We can do this easy or hard. Either way, it's happening." And just like that, he left. I sat there, alone with takeout that had gone cold and the evidence of my own oblivion. I could feel my chest tightening, a sense of nausea rolling over me. I wanted to scream, to cry, to beg him to stay, but the words wouldn't come. For almost a week, I couldn't believe it. I replayed the conversation endlessly, dissecting every word, every pause, every look. What had I done? When had it come to this? I was the victim, weren't I? That's what I kept telling myself. The next day, he returned, carrying only a coffee cup. One, for himself. Not even an attempt at normalcy, not even a hint of compromise. He set it down beside the envelope I had refused to touch and opened a worn notebook. Pages upon pages of meticulous notes stared back at me. Dates, times, things I had said, things I had done, all cataloged like evidence in a trial. "What is that?" I asked, my voice quivering. "Documentation," he said simply, "because I knew this day would come, and I wanted to protect myself from being gaslit." He started reading aloud. February. I had complained about his parents during a family dinner. March. I had mocked his car at a friend's party. April. He recounted my comments about vacation plans, money, ambition. Month after month, entry after entry, my words stared back at me, brutal and unflinching. I tried to protest, to cry, to rationalize. "I was just venting," I said. "I didn't mean it like that." "You did," he said, voice steady. Maybe not consciously, but the words were still said, over and over, to me, in front of friends and family, to anyone who would listen. I felt a hollow ache in my chest. Could this really be my life? 8 years together, 5 years married, and all it took was one calm, collected man and a notebook to shatter everything I thought I knew. By the time he left that day, I had begun to realize that my marriage had been slipping through my own hands. It wasn't just a prank or a misunderstanding. I had contributed, perhaps more than I cared to admit, to the downfall of my own life. I called my best friend Claire that night, desperate for perspective. She listened, nodding, until she asked to see the notebook. When she flipped through the pages, her expression changed. "Oh, wow," she said softly. "Okay, this is actually pretty bad." I felt the first crack of doubt form in my mind. Maybe I wasn't entirely the victim here. Maybe, just maybe, I had been blind. As I sat there, alone in the dim light of our apartment, the weight of my words, my complaints, and my obliviousness pressed down on me. This was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke to a strange emptiness in our apartment. Ethan had left his coffee cup on the counter, his presence lingering like a shadow, and the manila envelope sat untouched on the kitchen table. I couldn't stop thinking about the notebook, the entries, the meticulous way he had documented every time I had criticized him, subtly or not. I replayed the events in my mind. Had I really been that cruel? I wanted to argue, to shout that he had overreacted, that I was just venting, that anyone would have said the same things in my position, but the words stuck in my throat. There was something about the calm way he read those pages, the precision, the sheer weight of evidence. It was impossible to deny. I poured myself a coffee, sat at the table, and opened the notebook again. Each page was a mirror of my behavior, a timeline of my frustrations and my complaints. February, March, April. Every month chronicled. My sarcastic remarks at dinners, my comparisons to friends' husbands, my muttered insults about his car or his ambitions. There it all was, documented and undeniable. I felt defensive, my stomach nodding. "This is psychotic," I muttered aloud, the words tasting bitter. But even as I said it, a tiny voice in the back of my head whispered, "Maybe he has a point." By midday, I called Claire, my best friend since college. She arrived with a bottle of wine and a gentle expression, the kind that could usually calm my overinflated sense of grievance. I told her everything, the divorce papers, the notebook, Ethan's calm demeanor. She listened without interruption. When she asked to see the notebook, I hesitated. But eventually, I handed her the photos I had snapped of a few pages. Her eyes scanned the notes, and I watched the subtle shifts in her expression, the widening of her eyes, the tightness of her mouth. "Oh, wow, this is really something," she said finally. "I mean, I knew you complained about him, but seeing all of this together, it paints a different picture." I blinked, confused. "Different picture? Claire, he's the one tearing me apart. He left me. He's ruining my life." She shook her head gently. "I'm on your side, Sam. But you've been complaining about him for years. The job, the car, the money, the ambition. At what point does venting stop being venting and start being this?" She tapped the notebook lightly. "You've been building a persona around criticizing him constantly. That's what he's documenting." I felt the first real pangs of self-doubt. Could it be true? Had I really been tearing him down every single day without realizing it? I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. The notebook didn't lie. That night, I dug through old text messages, scrolling back years. In the beginning, Ethan had been effusive, sharing small joys, little moments from his day. His excitement was infectious. His messages had warmth. But over the years, the messages dwindled. He stopped sharing stories, stopped sending little notes, stopped trying to engage beyond the basics. I had assumed he had grown comfortable, maybe even lazy. But now I wondered, had he just stopped because I had been tearing him down relentlessly? I couldn't ignore the flashbacks either. I remembered the small things. His smile when he made me coffee just the way I liked it, the way he carried me when I sprained my ankle on a hike, the way he laughed at my terrible jokes in those early days. Those moments were gone, replaced by a cold distance that I had failed to notice, or worse, had contributed to. The calls from my family that evening were strained. My mother, voice heavy with concern, asked, "What happened? Did he tell you?" I hesitated, then tried to explain my perspective. She cut me off gently but firmly. "Sam, I've heard the way you talk about him. All of us have. You made your feelings very clear over the years, and now you're seeing the consequences." I felt my throat tighten. "But I didn't mean it like that. I was just being honest, just venting." "Venting crossed a line," she said softly. "You've been tearing him down for years, and now you're surprised he left? Sam, there's venting, and then there's verbal abuse. You crossed that line." Even my siblings weighed in later. Text from my brother. "He's leaving you because of how you treated him. Can't say I'm surprised." My sister. Maybe this will teach you that you can't talk to people however you want without consequences. Even coworkers, women I had once mentored, gave me the same message in hushed tones. The weight of it all pressed down on me. I had always imagined myself as the protagonist, the one suffering unfairly. But everywhere I looked, I began to see the reflection of my own behavior, mirrored back in disappointed eyes, silent judgments, and now an empty apartment. Later, when I tried to contact Ethan directly, he declined my calls, insisting all communication go through lawyers. The realization hit me like a second slap. The man I thought I had controlled through charm, frustration, and sarcasm had quietly prepared his exit for months. I had been blind to the warning signs, too wrapped up in my own grievances to notice his quiet withdrawal. By the time I went to bed that night, the apartment felt smaller, colder. My fingers brushed the notebook one last time before tucking it into a drawer. The wine Claire had brought sat half empty on the counter, forgotten. I stared at the ceiling, thoughts spiraling. Was I really the victim, or had I engineered my own downfall? For the first time, the narrative I had clung to, Ethan abandoning me for no reason, started to crack. And in that quiet, dark apartment, the seeds of accountability began to take root. The legal papers arrived first, crisp and impersonal. My heart sank as I read through them. Ethan would keep the apartment we had shared, the furniture he had purchased, the electronics, the dining table, the bed frame, essentially everything that had made our space feel like a home. I was left with a few decorative pillows I had bought on a whim, the coffee maker I'd insisted on during our second anniversary, and my car, which I was still paying off. The joint savings account was another blow. Technically, marital property, yet the statements revealed Ethan had deposited $16,500 over 5 years, while I had contributed only $2,500. Legally, I was entitled to little more than my own contributions, and contesting it would cost thousands more than I could afford. The reality hit like a punch to the stomach. Everything I thought I owned together, everything I had counted on, was gone. I had to find a new place. My budget was slim. After rent, car payments, insurance, and utilities, I had barely $1,100 for everything else. Every apartment I visited seemed worse than the last. Tiny, depressing studios in sketchy neighborhoods, basement units with mold, places so far from work that I'd spend hours commuting. Eventually, I settled for a 380-square-foot studio in a building that smelled faintly of old carpet and cigarettes. No dishwasher, no laundry, parking extra. The rent alone consumed most of my savings after paying first and last month plus the deposit and cleaning fee. Moving day was humiliating. The boxes of my possessions barely filled a corner of the apartment. There was no couch, no dining table, no chairs, just me, a mattress I'd purchased on credit, and a sinking feeling that this was all I had left. I ate dinner on the floor, staring at bare walls, the silence around me deafening. Work offered no comfort. Within a week, my supervisor called me into her office. My stomach sank as she placed a formal written warning in front of me. "Your behavior at work has been brought to our attention," she said. "Specifically, the way you discuss your personal life, your past relationship, and the consistent negativity you bring to your team is creating a hostile environment." I tried to argue, to explain that it had been years of venting, that no one should have taken it personally, but she was unwavering. Younger employees had even begun adopting my attitudes toward their own partners, creating broader tension. I left her office feeling like a ghost in my own workplace. Colleagues were polite but distant. Invitations to lunch stopped. Conversations became clipped and cold. Socially, things were no better. Claire, my best friend, had already begun to distance herself. Mutual friends seemed to quietly side with Ethan, and even family calls carried a strained, almost obligatory tone. My brother's texts were terse. My sister's check-ins felt perfunctory. Every interaction reminded me that my world was shrinking, that the people I had counted on had started to see me as I truly was. I tried dating. I created profiles on the usual apps, went on 4 dates over 3 weeks. Each one ended badly. The first man asked why I was divorced. When I offered vague explanations, he pressed for details, and I admitted my faults. He left abruptly. The second didn't even want to hear about the divorce, yet my incessant complaints about trivial things drove him away. The third date ended after 20 minutes. I had dominated the conversation with negativity, and he walked out mid-meal. By the fourth date, I had deleted all the apps, defeated. Money was tight. After rent, car, insurance, utilities, and credit card minimums, I had perhaps $200 for food and incidentals. Meals became instant noodles and frozen dinners. I lost weight rapidly, 12 pounds in a few weeks, not healthily, just from stress and scarcity. Yet it wasn't just the material loss. It was the slowly dawning realization that my marriage had been ruined by my own behavior. Going through old photos, I saw Ethan smiling at me, carrying me when I had twisted my ankle, laughing at my jokes. Those moments of easy, mutual affection were gone, replaced by the consequences of my constant criticism and unrealistic expectations. Text messages revealed a subtle pattern. Early in our relationship, Ethan sent me thoughtful messages, little notes, reminders of his care. Over time, my responses became curt, critical, or dismissive. Eventually, he stopped trying. Netflix histories showed him rewatching shows we had enjoyed together, but alone, quietly revisiting memories without me. The man I had taken for granted had adapted to my negativity in the only way he could, by withdrawing. Even therapy sessions forced me to confront harsh truths. My therapist asked, "If you met yourself at a party, would you want to be friends with you?" Initially, I said yes, but when pressed, I had to admit that the answer was no. Constant complaints, judgmental attitudes, a refusal to acknowledge anyone's efforts but my own, no one would choose to be around that person. By the end of the month, I was isolated. Apartment, work, social life, all diminished. I was living in the aftermath of my own choices, surrounded by silence and reminders of what I had destroyed. Ethan had moved on, quietly, calmly, and I was left to confront the full weight of my actions. The apartment, the lack of furniture, the empty fridge, the isolation, it all became a daily, tangible reminder of the consequences. No one to distract me from my thoughts, no friend to side with me, no partner to soften the edges of reality. My life, once comfortably shared, was now mine alone, stark and unyielding. Sitting on the floor that first night, staring at the bare walls, I could feel the enormity of my mistakes pressing down. It was a solitude that was both punishment and revelation. And as I drifted off to sleep on that thin mattress, I realized the story I had told myself for years, that I was the victim, that Ethan was unreasonable, was unraveling. For the first time, I began to understand that this life, this isolation, was not something that had happened to me. It was the direct result of choices I had made, words I had spoken, and the pattern of behavior I had created. The apartment was quiet, except for the hum of the radiator and the faint thrum of traffic outside. The walls, bare and unadorned, seemed to amplify my thoughts until they became deafening. For the first time, I had nothing to distract me from myself. I dug through the box of old photos I had brought with me from the old apartment. Pictures from our early years together, Ethan laughing as I stumbled over a trail during a hike, me sitting on a park bench with his arm around my shoulders, his hand warm, reassuring. There was a photo of him carrying me back to the car when I had sprained my ankle, his strength and care evident in every frame. I had loved that man. I knew I had. And somewhere along the way, I had stopped seeing him. Scrolling through old text messages, I noticed the pattern clearly. In the beginning, Ethan had sent little notes throughout the day. Saw a sunset that reminded me of our first date, or made cookies today, wished you were here to taste them. My responses had been enthusiastic, grateful, full of affection. Over the years, those messages dwindled. My replies became shorter, critical, or dismissive. Eventually, his messages stopped. He had tried. I had not noticed, or perhaps I had noticed and ignored them. I logged into our old Netflix account, still open on my laptop. I saw that he had been rewatching our favorite shows alone, shows that had been our shared moments, now solitary, his laughter gone. That quiet presence, the gentle joy of companionship, was missing, and it was my doing. Claire's words from that first week after the divorce echoed in my mind. Maybe he had a reason. Maybe he documented this for a reason. At the time, I had dismissed it as overly rational, almost cold, but now, as I sat alone on the floor, the truth crystallized. He had known. He had seen my pattern, and he had acted in the only way left open to him, by leaving. Therapy sessions forced me further into reflection. Would you want to be friends with yourself? My therapist asked. Initially, I said yes, but when pressed, I had to admit the truth. The constant criticism, the negativity, the ungratefulness, the dismissiveness. No one would want to be around that version of me, certainly not the man I claimed to love. I began to replay our conversations over the years, seeing them through a lens of accountability. The complaints about his car, his ambition, his job, the way I mocked him in front of friends, even subtle comments that I thought were jokes. They weren't harmless. They were constant, relentless, eroding his spirit. And I had been blind, or stubborn, refusing to see that I was not motivating him, but breaking him down. The loneliness was crushing. Nights stretched endlessly, filled only with the echo of my mistakes. Meals were quick, necessary, devoid of ritual or comfort. I stared at the empty spaces where furniture had once been, wondering if the emptiness mirrored the void I had created in my relationships, in my own character. I thought about the life I could have had. I could have appreciated him, encouraged him, celebrated his successes. I could have contributed to a partnership rather than constantly measuring, criticizing, and comparing. But instead, I had cultivated resentment and dissatisfaction, blaming him for the life I insisted should be perfect. Even minor interactions became reminders of my isolation. Walking past couples on the street, hearing laughter that wasn't mine, seeing gestures of care I had taken for granted, it was everywhere. The world had moved on, and I was left sifting through the wreckage of my own making. Sometimes I would catch myself thinking of calling him, trying to explain, apologize, or justify. But the thought quickly ended in shame. What could I say? That I had destroyed our shared life with a relentless need to critique? That I had failed to see the man in front of me until he was gone? Words felt inadequate, incapable of mending the past. Even small reminders struck me deeply. A scent, a song, a restaurant I knew he liked. My heart would tighten, and I would remember the ease, the warmth, the laughter, all gone, replaced by a quiet, bitter realization. This was a consequence of choices I had made long before the divorce papers arrived. I had lost him, yes, but more than that, I had lost myself. Not physically, but morally, emotionally. I could feel the distance between who I was and who I should have been expanding every day. The studio apartment, with its thin walls and bare corners, became a crucible for reflection. Every moment alone forced me to confront uncomfortable truths. The narrative I had built around Ethan as the villain was collapsing under the weight of evidence, of memories, of hard, undeniable reality. And yet there was a glimmer. In recognizing my own patterns, my own responsibility, I glimpsed the possibility of change. Not change in reversing the past, that was impossible, but change in how I might approach the future. Perhaps I could rebuild, not by reclaiming what I had lost, but by understanding why it had been lost. That night, I sat cross-legged on the floor, staring at the thin carpet, thinking about the years I had squandered. I realized that understanding my role was the first step toward becoming someone better. Someone who might never see Ethan again, but who could at least carry forward the lessons his departure had painfully impressed upon me. Weeks turned into months, and life in the studio apartment settled into a rhythm of solitude and reflection. The days were quiet, punctuated by work, simple meals, and the occasional phone call from family that never quite felt genuine. The walls were still bare, the space still small, but now it had become a mirror for my own thoughts, inescapable and unflinching. One evening, while picking up groceries, I saw him. Ethan, across the store, laughing with someone new. The woman I had glimpsed before, the one whose presence had once sparked a pang of jealousy. They were standing close, his arm brushing hers, his smile easy and unguarded. I froze, heart tightening. For a long moment, I just watched. He looked happier than I had seen him in years, relaxed, content, engaged in a way that had become foreign to me. There was a lightness in his laughter, a spontaneous warmth, the kind that I had driven away with my constant criticism, my sarcasm, my judgment. I didn't approach. I couldn't. Instead, I sat in my car afterward, letting the tears flow, mourning not just him, but the person I had been, the woman who had been unable to see what she had had until it was gone, the lessons I had ignored, the kindness I had withheld, the support I had failed to offer, gone, irretrievable. The stark contrast between his life and mine was a painful education. He had moved on quietly, gracefully, creating happiness despite my absence. And I was still trapped in the aftermath of my own behavior, living in a space that reflected my choices, bare, constrained, lonely. Calls to friends, attempts to socialize, even the rare flirtation, none of it went well. The weight of my past negativity, the reputation I had built through years of relentless complaining and critique, lingered. I realized that even if I wanted to be someone else, I had first to reckon with who I had been. Scrolling through old photos, I saw the evolution of our relationship, a slow decay that had seemed invisible in the moment. His small gestures of care, the thoughtful surprises, the laughter, we had shared all of it. And I had let it slip through my fingers, distracted by my own dissatisfaction, blind to the love that had been right in front of me. Even therapy confirmed it. My therapist's question haunted me daily. Would you want to be friends with yourself? The answer was no. My behavior, my constant dissatisfaction, my judgmental tendencies had pushed away not just him, but everyone who might have cared. Money remained tight. The studio apartment was still far from comfortable. Meals were quick and solitary. My social world had contracted to the size of these four walls. Yet, amidst the discomfort, the humiliation, and the regret, I began to understand a deeper truth. This was not just punishment. This was education. Ethan had left not because he was cruel, but because he had endured enough. I had made him feel small, inadequate, unappreciated, and my jokes, my venting, my constant comparisons had been the final nails. And now, in the stark quiet of my apartment, I could finally see it clearly. I would not get him back. That life was gone forever, replaced by what I had earned through my own actions. And as painful as that was, I had to accept it. There was no villain here but myself, no scapegoat to blame, no excuse sufficient to absolve the reality. Some days were harder than others, seeing couples on the street, hearing laughter behind closed doors, even the small joys of life. These moments were sharp reminders of what I had lost. But gradually, I began to internalize the lesson. Gratitude, kindness, and respect are not optional. They are essential. Without them, even love that is strong and patient will eventually leave. Late at night, sitting on the floor of my tiny studio, I finally admitted it to myself. I had been the antagonist of my own story. The good man I loved had not failed me, I had failed him. And the life I now lived, though stark, lonely, and uncomfortable, was a direct reflection of that truth. Ethan had moved on with someone who appreciated him, who laughed with him, who built him up rather than tearing him down. And I was left with the consequences of my years of criticism, my obsession with perfection, my inability to see the value of the person I had loved. This was my reality. A studio apartment with thin walls, an empty fridge, work that barely sustained me, friends who had distanced themselves, and a family who watched quietly as I struggled. It was the life I had built with my own hands, brick by brick, one harsh word at a time. And in the silence, I finally understood. I could not change the past. I could not undo the damage, bring back lost laughter, or reclaim what I had thrown away. But I could learn. I could reflect. I could become someone better, if only for myself. Ethan's happiness was not mine to reclaim. It was a reminder, a guidepost, a mirror of what I had failed to be. And as I sat alone, eating yet another simple meal, I whispered to myself the harshest truth I had ever faced. I had loved, and I had destroyed. And now I would have to live with it. The lesson was clear, bitter, and unrelenting. Love, respect, kindness, these are not just words. They are actions, daily commitments. Ignore them, and even the strongest heart will eventually walk away. And I had ignored them.